Are you saying that Africa should be seen as a priority? Because critics have said that it appears that Congress has not really stepped up its game to ensure that Africa is a priority on its agenda.
Absolutely. I think Congress has been stifled, as I mentioned, because of dysfunction with the Republican Party. But let's look at what the administration has been doing. The administration has been taking every opportunity to prioritize Africa. Even right now, making sure that African Leadership Summit is that annual event that's going on. These are the things that I believe that if we're saying we're prioritizing Africa, then there should be no conversation, right? It should be every year we know that there's the African Leadership Conference and that's going to be going on. And our only question should be, how do we make it better from last year? What lessons have we learned from last year? These trade agreements, like I said, it shouldn't be why are we hesitating. It should be here is a better trade agreement. And we're even sending people into different areas of trade. And like I said, right now, most of the conversations we're having when it comes to the United States, number one, security. And that security conversation must have Africa at the forefront. Climate change. I live in Florida. We see it every single day. And if we're talking about reducing emissions, where do you think you're going to get the resources to actually have the battery power? You're not getting it in Europe. You're not going to get it in the Indo-Pacific. You're going to get it in Africa. So how are we having these conversations and not putting Africa first? That's the issue that I'm having, and that's what we're fighting for when it comes to change. Now, I'm happy that the administration has been working with us, but without us actually having both chambers, I think we're going to continue to see a lack.
So, Congressman, what, in your view, do you think the U.S.-Africa trade relations should look like beyond AGOA?
I think it should be leaning more towards the future of the entire free world. Right now, like I said, we're focusing on markets that, they're necessary markets, but there's a bigger conversation going on. We are seeing more and more countries and islands and even, country areas that are close to the water that are being damaged by flooding and hurricanes and winds. So we're understanding and we're feeling it, especially in Florida. We're feeling that you need to have climate change, that we are having climate change, but we have to become more climate resilient. So as that conversation is going on with climate resiliency, and now I've traveled the entire world looking at this, it goes hand in hand with Africa. Why don't we have a climate change summit that has Africa at the forefront, right? That's what I want to see. When you talk about even energy security, which is huge for us because we're looking at a time where most people have electricity, the grids are going to be redone. We're investing in infrastructure dollars to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States. So as we're investing in infrastructure, how do we invest in infrastructure that's actually going to bring us towards the future without Africa? So, you don't want to invest in an old way, in an old system, and then you wake up and find that you're behind. So if I had to say what our trade policy should be centered on, it should be centered on a forward movement. It should be centered on leaning into what we've done right and pulling away of what we've done wrong. And it definitely has to include the diaspora. One of the reasons I lean so hard on the diaspora is because, I am part of the Haitian diaspora and I consider myself part of the African diaspora. And I know that when I'm dealing with issues when it comes to Haiti, there is a way for you to handle it. You can't just come in and think you're going to do anything. Haitian people will find it disrespectful very quickly. They would say, I don't want you offended me. And you would never know that. But behind the scenes, they're saying they don't want to work with you.
Florida has been experiencing a lot of flooding, the hurricanes. And it reminds people of the importance and urgency to help tackle climate change. How do you see the role of Africa on climate change issues?
Well, Africa, as I mentioned, is primary. It's very important. And it's important because most of the resources we're using now for energy actually have the toxic fumes and the carbons that are actually deteriorating and causing and exacerbating climate change. And so if we're going to start moving towards being climate resilient, we really do have to have more battery power. We really do have to start substituting and rebuilding our infrastructure to include that battery power. However, to make battery power sustainable, you have to have access to the resources. And so how could you get access to the resources if you're not dealing with Africa, if that's not priority? And that becomes a real issue. And so I think our focus when we look at climate change, we must realize the work that has to be done. One of the conversations when we talked about why Africa needs to be there, and one of the responses someone gave me is like, well, are we too late when it comes to dealing with Africa? Does China have a strong hold? And I said, well, you can't ever think you're too late when it comes to competition.